AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We talked about it a bit earlier in the show. Some interesting op-eds from those less inclined to be supportive of individual gun rights in response to the heroism of Jack Wilson at the church in White Settlement, Texas, taking down a church shooter who had murdered two of Jack Wilson's fellow congregants with one shot from about 50 feet away across the room. Now, this was a firearm instructor, and he's actually a candidate for county commissioner down in Tarrant County. And his campaign slogan, make sure your vote is on target.
Well, you know what? That's all right. Good for him.
That slogan,
it's topical. It works, and that slogan was in place before the church shooting.
Right. It's talk about foreshadowing. Jack Wilson on the event and the decision that he made and the heroism that he exhibited.
You mentioned that you took a pause because there were people in the area.
And there were people in front of me between the shooter and myself, trying to get, because the chaos that erupted when he shot the first time, some of the people stood up and were trying to get in the way. I had to wait just a second because the whole thing was less than 6 seconds from start to finish. And, that was, I had to make sure I didn't hit it, someone, a member there, as they were right in front of me. There was no verbal communication out of him whatsoever at that point. He was down, he was bleeding profusely, and the only movement was, just body twitching, which, happens, when someone is in that condition where they're about to die.
The rounds that put him down were yours?
Yeah, there was only one. I only fired one round, and it was, the only shot I had, which, was a headshot, which, in my classes I'd teach not to take headshots, but, that was what I felt. That's the only shot I had a clear shot, and I was comfortable taking the shot. I don't see myself as a hero. I see myself as doing what needed to be done to take out the evil threat. That's the way I approach it. That is, like I said earlier, that's how I am, processing this whole event.
He's a cool customer, no question, and I like the fact that both he and the minister there talked about evil. There is evil in this world.
Yeah, I saw your tweet on it.
Also, we find out that the shooter was known to the church, that he had actually been fed by the church before, and he was apparently upset that the church leadership there had refused his request for money. The shooter also was ruled mentally incompetent to stand trial in 2012. So known quantity again. And it's worth pointing out, Jack Wilson also was the lead for security for the church, which is why he was carrying. But there was at least half a dozen other congregants that were carrying as well. And this has been something that the gun grabbers have seized upon to say, oh, sure, Jack Wilson was a hero. What he did was heroic, and that's great, but he was trained.
Mm-hmm. One round fired.
And from 50 feet, too. And he was the designated security person. But now all these other people carrying guns. Is that really the culture we want? Cover me, I'm going to communion? For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by John Lott Jr., president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, author of a number of books, including The War on Guns and More Guns, Less Crime. John, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, Happy New Year. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. And so the arguments that, hey, look, it was great what Jack Wilson did, but that speaks to the need to have perhaps an individual trained in places like soft targets like churches or schools, but it certainly doesn't justify just random congregants carrying weapons.
Well, on our website at crimeresearch.org, we have literally dozens of cases in just the last few years where people with permanent concealed handguns have stopped what otherwise would have been mass public shootings, just as happened at this church near Fort Worth, and and they worked out well. The types of concerns that were raised by gun control activists, advocates such as, maybe they would shoot somebody else, or maybe when the police arrived, they would accidentally shoot the wrong person. Are those types of things possible? Sure. But the point is that in none of the cases where people have used their permanent concealed handguns to legally stop one of these attackers have either of those concerns that were raised actually occurred. And, it seems to me if you can point to dozens of cases where what would have been a mass public shooting was stopped by these civilians, and they're successful, and you can't point to a single case where the types of problems that they're concerned about have happened, it doesn't seem to me that you're going to want to put a lot of weight on the types of concerns that they're raising.
Now, one of the other concerns raised to try to, muddle the issue a bit, to say, yeah, Jack Wilson, good guy with a gun, but you still had a bad guy with a gun, and that speaks to our gun culture. How did the shooter obtain a weapon? And don't forget, there was a bad guy with a gun, and this speaks to guns, the omnipresence of guns.
Sure. Right. Well, the problem is it's pretty hard to stop bad people from getting guns. The major source, for example, we know that this person illegally obtained the gun. The major source for illegal guns are drug dealers. It's as hard to, let's put it this way, it's as easy for a criminal to obtain a gun as it is for them to obtain illegal drugs. If you think that we've successfully stopped people from obtaining illegal drugs in this country, I wish we were able to go and stop them from being able to do that. And the problem that you have is that if you go and you ban guns from these areas there, who would have been the only person that would have had the gun then in that case? It would have been the bad guy. And guess what? If you have only the bad guy having the gun, what do you think is going to happen?
Right. Now, in New York State, this is rather interesting. There's a story in the Post about Jews taking a self-defense class after the Jersey City kosher market shooting.
Right.
But the self-defense class administered by a former NYPD officer and martial arts expert is showing Jewish people how to throw axes as a counterterrorism measure. But it just strikes me as remarkable now, particularly now thinking about this after the machete attack at the synagogue in Monsey, New York. Boy, an axe, unarmed at altogether, so that you could be susceptible to somebody wielding a knife or a machete, as was the case in that synagogue attack. What is it? What's the psychosis people need to get over to say, I'm going to be trained on another inanimate object, not an axe, but a gun, because that's the great equalizer. So I'm going to become proficient where I feel comfortable so that I can defend myself, my loved ones, and others. I just, the axe throwing class just is remarkable to me as a response to the Jersey City shooting.
Right. Well, we don't have police officers going around carrying axes to go and try to defend themselves. There's a reason why police think that it's a lot more effective for them to go and have guns for self-defense. And what are you going to do if, the attacker there is able to go and get a gun? Do you really want to go and take an axe to a gunfight? My guess is the answer is no. My wish is I wish that in that knife attack that was occurred in New York against the Jews there, that one of them had been armed. And, the thing is, my guess is the entire gun control debate would be very different if stories like this case in Texas got more attention. The thing that's unusual about this case in Texas is that it got national news coverage.
Yeah.
The other cases, as I say, I can give you dozens of dramatic cases that just don't get news coverage. And the last 5 years, I can only think of 2 other cases that got any national news coverage where a permit holder stopped what would have been a mass public shooting. And in the cases there, the media got it backwards. They didn't even get it right. I'll give you one example. A year ago, there was the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. 2 days different from that, you may remember there was a mass public shooting at a Kroger grocery store in Louisville, Kentucky, and or what almost was a mass public shooting. A racist had gone into the grocery store and was shooting blacks. And what got the national news coverage was the quote. This was on NBC Meet the Press and many other national outlets, was that the murderer in that case told another customer, whites don't shoot whites. And the way it was played in the media was here you had this racist going to a white customer and assuring the white customer that he was okay, he wasn't going to get shot because whites don't shoot whites. Well, I actually was texting back and forth up until that time with Chuck Todd. And when Chuck basically spent about 5 minutes on the story and had that quote, I texted him. I said, look, here are some articles from Louisville, and they have a more complete quote, because what the murderer had actually done was he had said, please don't shoot me. Whites don't shoot whites. What happened was that rather than assuring the customer there that he wasn't going to shoot him, the customer there had a permanent concealed handgun pointed at the murderer, and the murderer was pleading with the customer not to shoot the murderer. And so here you had a white customer that came to the aid of the black customers that were there and exchanged gunfire with the murderer and wounded him. And the murderer got into his car, drove about a mile, and passed out because of his wounds, and the police caught him then. But, but even in the case where the national media covered it, they got it backwards. And nobody would correct. They wouldn't even correct it.
Well, I mean, this example is corrected, but even though Jack Wilson and what happened in White Settlement, Texas got national coverage, Reuters got it wrong too. Reuters reported that the shooter owned a range and was trained and trained other people in firearm use. And in point of fact, of course, it was Jack Wilson that owned the range and trained. So 180 degrees wrong, ascribing to the shooter this idea, he's just like a mass shooter could be a range owner who trains law-abiding citizens in how to use firearms. No, that wasn't the case. It was the opposite. So, right. that story was corrected, but I mean, that's still a gross error, and their gross errors always seem to be in the direction of their preferred narrative.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's embarrassing, but, the thing is, one of the reasons why I think that this case was unusual in terms of getting coverage is that Jack Wilson was part of security, and and obviously he was just a volunteer. He wasn't getting paid. It was just, that's what happens in a lot of these churches. They just say, well, you have a concealed carry permit. We'll make you our security force that's here.
What if you dare to bring a weapon in as an usher without a concealed carry? If you have a FOID card, is that
well, you don't need a FOID card there. That's only Illinois. Well,
right,
not
but I'm
only
saying in Illinois,
but,
if someone was ushering and there's recently been some outbursts where people storm the church yelling, you guys are communists, and all these crazy people keep interrupting the service, and say the usher brought in a weapon but didn't have a concealed carry, and something happened and they used their weapon, what kind of ramifications would there be?
Well, it'd be illegal for the person to be carrying without a concealed carry permit in Texas. That's required. But Texas law says that you're allowed to go and bring in a gun, a permanent concealed handgun, into a church with the approval of the minister for the church there. And so the minister basically there in Texas said, look, you have a concealed carry permit, you've got through the training and gotten approved, I'll just automatically designate you guys as our security force.
Exactly, and that law change was after the Sutherland Springs church shooting in 2017, where you had another certified instructor, Stephen Williford, grab his AR-15, engage the shooter, and save lives, and lead to a law change so that Jack Wilson was in a position to save lives on Sunday. I mean, it's remarkable the twists and contortions the left is trying to do to argue that this isn't good public policy.
No, the left fought strenuously against the change that went into effect in September. The law that you're talking about, they said that was dangerous, that you can't allow people to have it because something might possibly go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fortunately, they lost in this case, and the law went into effect. Otherwise, there very likely would have been a lot of dead people at that church. And, I mean, that's the Texas Department of Public Safety, the local county sheriff, others have said that they believe many people would have been killed if it hadn't been for Jack Wilson there. But as I say, on our website, there are literally dozens of dramatic cases, not just the Kroger grocery store. I can give you, just a few months after the Parkland shooting in Florida, there was another shooting at a school, an elementary school. It was kind of an event for parents and kids at a local park, literally hundreds of kids there plus their parents. And a man came over and started shooting his gun.
Yeah.
Fortunately, since it was at a park, there were vendors that were there, and one of the vendors had his permanent concealed handgun. He was allowed to be there with it since it wasn't a school. And he seriously wounded the attacker before, even though the attacker had fired multiple shots, he hadn't hit anybody. But the people were screaming. The kids were kind of trapped because it was a baseball field, and they were kind of, bunched up against the fence there and couldn't get out. And the killer was moving in towards them. But a permit holder stopped that. Now, the thing is, that only got local news coverage. Can you imagine the night, but national coverage or more international coverage that would have gotten if the permit holder wasn't there to stop it and the killer had gone and actually hit his targets as he eventually would have. And it creates a real imbalance because when bad things happen, they get huge international coverage. When people stop them from happening, the media completely ignores them, except in this case where I think, as I say, what happened was it got coverage because the initial news stories were all, armed security at the church stopped it,
right?
Which is okay. It fits their narrative that's there. I'll give you one other.
John, I'm sorry, we got to go, but I appreciate it. The website is crimeresearch.org for more of these stories. Crimeresearch.org. John Lott Jr., president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. John, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hey, Pat, I need copies of your engineering blueprints for the new tenants on floor 15.
We have the spec